The snow had stopped, but the silence felt heavier than the storm. Years later, men from United States Army would still remember the moment in whispers. Not because of the sniper shot, not because of the dead medic lying face down in the frozen mud, and not even because the captured man wore the black runes of the Waffen SS. They remembered because of what happened next. A German sniper who had just shot an unarmed American medic looked up from the ground, blood on his face and ice in his hair, and demanded protection under the Geneva Convention. Then George S. Patton arrived. For several long seconds, no one moved. The men who stood there in the Ardennes Forest on December 29, 1944, knew they were watching more than the fate of one prisoner. They were
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
watching a test of whether law still mattered after weeks of killing, freezing, and burying friends in shallow graves cut into frozen earth. And Patton, the most feared general in the American Army, had to decide. The winter of 1944 was one of the coldest in living memory. In the forests and fields of Ardennes, temperatures fell far below freezing. Rifles jammed. Truck engines refused to start. Men slept in foxholes lined with pine branches and woke with ice on their blankets. Every breath burned. The Battle of the Bulge had begun on December 16, when German forces crashed through thin American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg. The attack was Hitler's last major gamble in the West. If it succeeded, the Germans hoped to split Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. Instead, the battle became one of the bloodiest and most brutal campaigns fought by American soldiers in Europe. Among the units moving through the snow under Patton's Third United States Army were infantry regiments that had already been fighting for months. Their uniforms were stiff with mud and oil. Their boots were cracked. Many had not had a hot meal in days. Yet the medics kept moving. Combat medics were among the most respected men at the front. They carried no rifles in many situations, only bandages, morphine syrettes, plasma, and the hope that they might reach a wounded soldier in time. Their helmets and armbands bore large red crosses. Under the rules of war, they were protected personnel. That did not mean they were safe. German and American medics were often hit by artillery, machine gun fire, and mortars. But there was a difference between being caught in combat and being deliberately targeted. The men of the 26th Infantry Division would never forget that difference. On the morning of December 29, near the village of Ettelbruck, an American rifle platoon was advancing along the edge of a frozen field bordered by pine trees and low stone walls. The hour was just after 8 a.m. The sky was gray and visibility was poor. A private first class went down with a wound to the leg. His cries carried over the snow. Within seconds, the platoon medic ran forward. He was Technician 5th grade Harold Mendelson, 23 years old, from Cleveland. He had trained to save lives, not take them. Men trusted him because he moved toward danger when everyone else sought cover. Kneeling beside the wounded infantryman, Mendelson opened his medical pouch. Then one sharp crack split the morning. Mendelson jerked once and collapsed across the man he was trying to save. For a moment, nobody understood what had happened. Then a second bullet struck the snow inches from another soldier's helmet. Sniper. The platoon hit the ground. Officers and non-commissioned officers quickly pieced together what they had seen. The first shot had not been random. It had not struck a man carrying a rifle. It had hit a medic wearing clear Red Cross markings while he treated a casualty in open view. The effect on the platoon was immediate and deeply personal. The wounded infantryman beneath Mendelson survived, but the medic was dead within seconds. The men who pulled his body back were shaking with rage. The platoon commander, First Lieutenant Robert Keene, reported the incident by field telephone to battalion headquarters. The message moved upward through channels. A deliberate shooting of protected medical personnel was a serious matter even in the chaos of battle. But before any staff officer could write a report, the platoon wanted the sniper. The search began at once. 2 squads moved along the tree line while a light machine gun team pinned likely hiding spots. Snow preserved every movement. Fresh tracks led toward a shattered farmhouse half hidden among the pines. The soldiers advanced slowly, fingers numb on their triggers. Inside the ruined building, they found spent 7.92 mm cartridges, a camouflage blanket, and a rifle rest built from broken beams. The sniper was still there. He attempted to escape through the rear door, but slipped on ice and fell down a shallow embankment. A burst of rifle fire wounded him in the shoulder. When the Americans reached him, he was alive, conscious, and terrified. His name was believed to be Oberscharfer Karl Weiss, a non-commissioned officer of the Waffen SS. The men dragged him into the courtyard. Mendelssohn's body lay only a few yards away beneath a poncho. Several soldiers wanted immediate revenge. Officers struggled to maintain order. Then the prisoner spoke. He demanded treatment for his wound. He demanded to be treated as a prisoner of war. He demanded his rights under the Geneva Convention. The word spread through the platoon like a spark through dry brush. A man who had just ignored the laws of war was now invoking them to save himself. Some soldiers laughed in disbelief. Others cursed. One had to be physically restrained. Lieutenant Keene understood the danger. In battles as bitter as the Ardennes, prisoners were not always guaranteed survival when emotions boiled over. He ordered the prisoner secured and sent a second report to battalion headquarters. This one included a remarkable detail. Captured SS sniper requests Geneva Convention protection after shooting medic. By noon, the report had reached division staff. By evening, it was moving toward Third Army headquarters. And somewhere along those frozen roads, Patton was coming. George Smith Patton, Jr. was already a legend by the winter of 1944. Born in San Gabriel, educated at United States Military Academy, and hardened through campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and France, he was known for speed, aggression, and relentless discipline. His men often feared him. Many also admired him. Patton demanded polished helmets, clean weapons, and decisive action. But beneath the harsh language and dramatic image was a commander who studied military law and understood that discipline separated armies from mobs. He also despised the Waffen SS. American troops had discovered evidence of massacres, including the murder of U.S. prisoners near Malmedy by Kampfgruppe Piper earlier that month. News of those killings spread rapidly. Hatred toward the SS was intense. Patton knew this better than anyone. On December 30, at a forward command post near Luxembourg City, Patton reviewed operational reports while planning the next day's attacks. Fuel, artillery ammunition, road conditions, and casualty numbers covered his desk. Among the papers was the sniper incident. At first glance, it was one small episode in a battle involving hundreds of thousands of men. But Patton paused. He asked for details. Who was the medic? Was the Red Cross clearly visible? Was the prisoner identified as SS? Had he been wounded and captured? Had he specifically invoked Geneva protections? The answers came back quickly. Yes. Patton said he wanted the prisoner kept alive and questioned. The order surprised some officers. Given Patton's fierce reputation, a few had expected explosive anger. Instead, he was methodical. The prisoner was moved under guard to a secure holding area. Army medical personnel treated his wound. Bandages were applied by the same kind of men he had targeted the day before. That irony was not lost on anyone. When Patton arrived at the holding area, conditions were stark. Snow lined the roads outside. Trucks idled in the cold. Armed guards stood rigid. The wounded SS sergeant sat on a crate with his arm in a sling, pale and exhausted. Patton entered wearing his steel helmet and heavy field coat. Ivory-handled pistols rested at his sides. Mud clung to his boots. Conversation stopped instantly. Veterans who later recalled the moment said the atmosphere changed, as if the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Patton looked first at the prisoner, then at the report, then at the officers present. He asked for a summary. The facts were repeated. A medic marked with the Red Cross had gone forward to treat a wounded soldier. The sniper fired and killed him. The sniper was captured after being wounded. He demanded rights under the Geneva Convention. Patton listened without interruption. The SS prisoner reportedly insisted that, as a wounded prisoner of war, he was entitled to medical care and humane treatment. That statement hung in the air. Around them stood American soldiers who had carried their medic's body through the snow less than 24 hours earlier. Patton's face remained unreadable. Then he spoke. He said that the United States Army would obey the laws of war, regardless of what the enemy had done. The prisoner would receive medical treatment. He would be interrogated. If evidence confirmed a deliberate attack on protected medical personnel, he would be tried under military law. No one would shoot him. No one would mistreat him. No one would take revenge. The order was absolute. Some soldiers were disappointed. Others were stunned. But no one misunderstood the message. Patton was not showing mercy because he felt sympathy for the prisoner. He was defending the principle that American conduct would not be dictated by anger. That distinction mattered. In the weeks after the Battle of the Bulge, Allied investigators documented numerous war crimes. Deliberate attacks on medics, execution of prisoners, and killings of civilians were all subject to investigation. The captured SS sniper became part of that larger legal process. Records from wartime frontline incidents were often incomplete, and many individual cases disappeared into broader intelligence and judicial files. But the central fact remembered by veterans was Patton's decision in the moment: treat the prisoner lawfully, then hold him accountable. This was consistent with Patton's leadership style. Though famous for aggressive tactics, he insisted that officers control their men. He knew that undisciplined retaliation could destroy morale, undermine justice, and expose American prisoners to greater danger. If U.S. forces ignored the Geneva Convention when emotions ran high, they would abandon the very standards they claimed to defend. That did not mean Patton was soft. Far from it. He believed in hard punishment for proven crimes. A deliberate attack on a clearly marked medic was not simply another battlefield death. It was a violation of accepted rules that even hardened soldiers recognized as essential. Medics represented one of the few remaining boundaries in industrial war. They crossed open ground to save the wounded. They treated friend and enemy alike. And they gave men a reason to believe that some humanity still existed amid destruction. When Harold Mendelsohn was buried, members of his unit stood in the cold as a chaplain read brief words over the grave. Snow rested on helmets and shoulders. Many of the men had not cried when friends were killed in combat. This time was different. Mendelsohn had died doing the one job every soldier hoped someone would do for him. His death cut deeply. Yet the story that spread through the division was not that the sniper had been torn apart by angry infantrymen. It was that Patton had refused to let rage make the decision. Veterans later described that choice as one of the clearest examples of command discipline they ever witnessed. They did not forget their medic. They did not forgive the sniper. But they saw that law was strongest when applied to the people who least deserved its protection. This was one of the central tensions of the Second World War. Allied soldiers fought regimes responsible for atrocities across Europe. Many American troops entered liberated areas and saw concentration camps, murdered civilians, and destroyed communities. Their anger was real and often overwhelming. Commanders had to channel that anger without surrendering to it. Patton understood this as both a soldier and a student of history. He had spent years reading about ancient armies, Napoleon's campaigns, and the American Civil War. He knew that victorious armies could lose their moral authority if they abandoned discipline. In his view, a commander's duty was not to feel less anger than his men. It was to control what happened next. The SS sniper likely believed his appeal to the Geneva Convention was a clever shield. In a narrow sense, he was correct. The law did protect wounded prisoners, even those accused of serious crimes, but invoking those rights did not erase what he had done. It ensured he would face judgment instead of summary execution. That difference is the heart of this story. Justice is not the absence of punishment. Justice is the refusal to punish without process. On the battlefields of Europe in 1944, that principle was difficult to maintain. Men were exhausted, grieving, and often operating in conditions where a single officer's decision determined whether a prisoner lived or died. Patton could have looked away. He could have allowed events to take their course. Few outside that frozen compound might ever have known. Instead, he chose to make an example, not of revenge, but of discipline. The message spread quickly through Third Army. American soldiers were expected to fight hard, move fast, and destroy the enemy. But they were also expected to remain soldiers under law. For some, the order was frustrating. For others, it became a point of pride. They were not fighting only to defeat Germany. They were fighting to prove that their army operated by a different standard. That belief helped sustain morale in ways that are easy to overlook. In war, men need to know not only what they are fighting against, but what they are fighting for. The Geneva Convention was not a piece of paper carried by lawyers in distant offices. At the front, it represented a fragile agreement that wounded men would be treated, prisoners would be spared, and medics would be respected. When those rules were broken, trust eroded. When commanders enforced them, even under pressure, they restored some measure of order. Patton's decision also protected American interests in practical terms. Thousands of U.S. soldiers were prisoners in German hands. Every public commitment to lawful treatment strengthened Allied expectations that captured Americans deserved the same. Military ethics and military necessity were not always separate. Sometimes they reinforced one another. As the war continued into 1945, Third Army pushed across the Rhine River and deeper into Germany. Patton's forces liberated prisoners, captured cities, and helped bring the conflict in Europe to its end. Harold Mendelsohn did not live to see victory. Like thousands of combat medics, he died carrying bandages instead of ammunition. His story was one among many, but to the men who served with him, it symbolized the quiet courage that held infantry units together. The SS sniper who killed him sought protection from the same legal system he had ignored. And Patton, a man often remembered for profanity, speed, and aggression, answered with something more powerful than anger. He answered with restraint. That is why veterans kept telling this story. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, not because Patton shouted, though many expected him to, but because in one of the coldest and most violent winters of the war, he demonstrated that discipline was strongest when vengeance felt most justified. You can almost hear the wind moving through the Ardennes pines. You can picture the medic in the snow, the prisoner clutching his wound, and the soldiers waiting for their general to decide. One sentence could have ended a life on the spot. Instead, Patton chose a harder path. Treat him. Guard him. Try him. Those words drew a line between justice and revenge. In the end, that line may be one of the most important things Allied soldiers defended in Europe. Tanks, artillery, and infantry divisions won battles, but principles decided what kind of victory it would be. And on that frozen day in Luxembourg, with grief still fresh and rifles still smoking, George S. Patton showed his men that strength was not only the power to destroy an enemy, it was the discipline to uphold the law even when the enemy had not. That was the lesson carried home by the soldiers who stood there. That was the reason they never forgot. And that is what Patton did when an SS sniper demanded Geneva Convention rights after shooting a medic.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.